If someone you love has been lost to you, this story is going to find something in you that you thought was gone. 8 years is long enough to stop expecting the phone to ring. Lorraine Mabry had stopped expecting it sometime around the 4th year, not because she had given up. She was careful about that distinction. Careful in the way that people are careful about the words they use for things that matter enormously, because the wrong word could make the wrong thing true. She had not given up. She had simply, across the accumulation of 4 years of hoping at a frequency that was not sustainable, learned to redirect the hope into something that did not require a result. She hoped the way she prayed, without deadline, without the specific expectation of a specific answer on a specific morning. In the open-ended way of a woman who had decided that faith was not a transaction, but a practice, and that the practicing of it was what she was responsible for, and the answering of it was someone else's territory entirely. She was 61 years old. She had come to Atlanta from Shreveport, Louisiana, with her sister Dorothy, her brother-in-law Carl, her neighbor and closest friend Wanda Prajan, and her youngest son Marcus, who was 29, and who had organized the Family Feud application with the specific purposefulness of a son who had watched his mother carry something alone for 8 years, and had decided that she deserved one afternoon of being in a room where people cheered for her without knowing anything about what she was carrying. She was a retired cafeteria manager. She had run the kitchen at Woodlawn Elementary in Shreveport for 26 years, a job that had required her to feed 340 children every school day in a window of 47 minutes. A logistical challenge that she had managed with the organized calm of a woman who had raised 3 boys and understood that the variables in any large operation were always human and always manageable if you paid the right kind of attention. She had retired at 59, 2 years before the taping, and had filled the time with her garden and her church and her grandchildren, Marcus's 2 girls, who came on Saturdays and who called her Grandma Lo, and who she taught to cook with the patient specificity of a woman passing on something she understood to be important. She had 3 sons. Everyone in her life knew about 2 of them. The 3rd son's name was Deshaun. He was 34 years old. He had been Lorraine's middle child, the one who had her laugh and his father's restlessness, a combination that had produced in him, across his 20s, a brightness and an instability that existed in the same space, that drew people toward him and that cost him, and cost the people who loved him, in ways that accumulated slowly and then all at once. The trouble had started when Deshaun was 24. That was how Lorraine described it. Always, the trouble started, because the language of starting implied the possibility of stopping, which was the only frame she had ever been willing to hold it in. What the trouble was, specifically, she had told very few people. Dorothy knew. Wanda knew. Because Wanda had been 3 houses down for 30 years, and had known things about Lorraine's life that Lorraine had not chosen to share, but that proximity had made inevitable. Marcus knew the outline, had known since he was 21, and Deshaun had been 26, and something had happened at a family gathering that had made the outline visible in a way it could no longer be managed around. The trouble was addiction. Prescription painkillers initially, following a back injury Deshaun had sustained at the warehouse job he had held for 3 years, and then other things as the prescriptions ran out, and the pain, which was real, did not. And then the particular geography of addiction, which is not a straight line, but a landscape, with terrain that changes and doubles back and looks different depending on where you are standing in it, and at what point in the journey. Lorraine had done everything. This was not a thing she said to herself with bitterness or with pride, but simply as an accounting of what had been tried. The interventions, the treatment programs, the calls at 2 in the morning, and the calls that did not come when calls should have come, the bail, the lawyers, The conversations that ended in promises, and the promises that held for weeks or months before the landscape shifted again. She had done everything. And she had also, eventually, at the counsel of a therapist she had seen for 8 months after Deshawn's second program, learned the thing that was the hardest thing she had ever learned in her life. That doing everything was not the same as being able to fix it. And that the fixing was not in her territory any more than the answering of prayers was, and that the most she could do was leave the door unlocked and the light on, and love him from the distance that the situation required. The distance that the situation required had, in the 8th year, been 8 years. The last time she had seen Deshawn in person was a Sunday in September. 8 years ago, he had come to the house in Shreveport in a condition that had frightened her in a way that she had not been frightened since the early years, when the landscape was still new. She had let him in. She had fed him. She had sat with him for 4 hours. At the end of the 4 hours, she had said, in the voice she used for things that could not be softened without being falsified, "I love you. You cannot stay here until you are in a program. That is not a condition I'm putting on my love. It is a condition I'm putting on my house, because I cannot watch this anymore and survive it." He had looked at her for a long time. Then he had said, "I know, Mama." He had left. She had stood at the kitchen window and watched him walk down the street, and had gone to her bedroom and kneeled beside her bed and prayed in the open-ended way, the way that did not require a deadline or a result, the way she had learned to pray in the years when the other way had not been sustainable. She had not seen him since. She had heard from him 4 times in 8 years. A text on her birthday in year 2. A single sentence, no context, that she had read 12 times and saved in a folder she kept on her phone, labeled simply D. A phone call in year 4, at midnight, during which he had not said much, but had stayed on the line for 11 minutes, and she had stayed on the line too, and neither of them had said the things they probably needed to say, but the line between them had been open, and that had been something, had been the proof that he was alive, and that he still had her number, which was the minimum she had asked of the universe in the open-ended prayers, and which she had received. A text in year 6, 3 words, "I'm getting help," that she had read standing in the kitchen, and that had made her grab the counter with both hands and stand there for a long time, and then silence again, which she had held with the practiced endurance of a woman who had learned that silence was not the same as absence, and absence was not the same as gone. Marcus had known more than Lorraine realized. He had stayed in contact with Deshawn more consistently than he had told his mother, not dishonestly, but in the specific way that younger siblings sometimes hold a space between an estranged family member and a parent, managing both relationships with a care that protects the parent from the worst of the uncertainty while keeping the thread alive. He had talked to Deshawn 6 times in the last 2 years. The most recent call had been 3 months before the taping. Deshawn had been sober for 14 months. He was in a program in Atlanta, a long-term residential program, the structured kind, the kind that worked in the specific way that longer programs worked by giving time itself a function in the architecture of recovery. He had a job at a print shop. He had an apartment. He had a sponsor named Gerald, who had known him for 11 months, and who had told Marcus, in a call that Marcus had made without Deshawn's knowledge just to verify, that Deshawn was doing the work and doing it honestly, and that 14 months was not a guarantee, but it was real. Marcus had called the Family Feud production team in January. He had explained the situation in full. The 8 years, the recovery, the 14 months. Deshawn's situation in Atlanta, the apartment, and the job, and the sponsor, and the 14 months. He had been transferred to Angela, the senior coordinator. Angela had listened to the full account without interrupting. At the end, she had asked 3 questions. Was Deshaun in a stable enough place for this emotionally? Had he been working with a therapist or counselor who could be consulted? And this was the question Angela always asked, the question that was the hinge of everything. Did he want to do this, genuinely without pressure, for himself as much as for anyone else? Marcus had said he didn't know the answer to the 3rd question, and that he thought Deshaun needed to be the one to answer it. Angela had called Deshaun directly. That call had lasted 34 minutes. Deshaun had asked twice whether he could think about it. Angela had said yes both times. He had called back the next morning. He had said yes. He had said. And Angela had written it down, because she wrote down the things that people said in these calls that carried the weight of 8 years in a single sentence. I've been wanting to walk back through that door for a long time. I just didn't know if it was still open. Angela had told him it was open. She had then spent 6 weeks coordinating with Deshaun's counselor, a man named Dr. Patterson, who had been working with him for 9 months, to ensure that the reunion was approached with the clinical care it required. Dr. Patterson had said, after 3 conversations with Angela and 1 with Steve's briefing team, that in his professional assessment Deshaun was ready, that the 14 months were solid, that the therapeutic work had addressed the specific patterns that had driven the estrangement, and that reunion in a supported environment with professional follow-up was, if anything, the kind of milestone that the recovery process was built toward. He would be in the building. He would be accessible. He had briefed Deshaun on what the day might feel like and what to do if the feeling became too large. Deshaun had pressed his suit himself the night before. He had stood in his apartment in Atlanta and pressed it carefully, and hung it on the door, and stood back and looked at it for a moment. He had called his sponsor Gerald. They had talked for 20 minutes. Gerald had said, "You've earned this." Deshaun had said, "I don't know if earn is the right word." Gerald had said, "What's the right word?" Deshaun had thought for a moment. He had said, "Maybe just arrived." Gerald had said, "Then you've arrived." Deshaun had said, "Yeah." They had been quiet for a moment. Then Gerald had said, "Call me after." Deshaun had said he would. He had been in a production room off the main corridor for 2 hours when the game started, 200 feet from his mother. He had asked Angela once whether he could hear the audience, not see the stage, just hear the audience, and she had arranged it, and he had stood near a wall speaker for part of that time and listened to the sound of a room full of people cheering for his mother. And the listening had done something to him that he was not fully able to describe afterward, but that Dr. Patterson, when he heard about it, said made complete clinical sense. It had let him arrive at the moment already knowing that she was okay, that she was in a room full of people who were with her, that whatever happened next, she was not alone. The game had been good from the opening intros. Lorraine at the podium was the woman her colleagues at Woodlawn Elementary had known for 26 years, organized, warm, direct, the particular combination of qualities that made 340 children want to eat their lunch and made the cafeteria staff want to come to work. Steve Harvey had made her laugh in the first minute, the full laugh, and Dorothy on the bench had clapped her hands once with the satisfaction of a woman watching her sister be exactly herself. The opposing family, the Gaines family from Birmingham, were 5 sharp and generous people who had been trading warmth with the Mowbray family since the opening, and who had created, together, the specific atmosphere of a room where everyone was having the best possible version of an ordinary day. They were 3 questions into the second round when Steve stepped back from the podium. He said, "Lorraine, can I ask you something personal?" She looked at him. She said, "You can ask." He said, "Tell me about the hardest thing you've ever waited for." The studio fell completely silent. Lorraine Mabry stood at the podium and looked at Steve Harvey, and the looking lasted long enough that the audience understood they had arrived at something that was not part of the game. Her hands, which had been moving when she talked all afternoon, went still. The full laugh was gone, and something older and more serious had replaced it. The face of a woman arriving at a question she had been carrying the answer to for 8 years. She said, quietly, "My son." Steve said, "Tell me about him." And she did. She told it in the direct, undecorated way she told hard things, the trouble, the programs, the Sunday in September, the 4 contacts in 8 years. The text in year 6, the open-ended prayers, the folder on her phone labeled D. She told it without self-pity and without performance, in the voice she had used for 26 years to give difficult information to frightened people. The voice that had learned how to carry hard truth without dropping it. She told it, and the studio was completely silent for all of it, and when she finished, she said one more thing. One thing she had not planned to say, that arrived from somewhere underneath the accounting, she said, "I never stopped leaving the light on." The studio fell completely silent for the second time. Steve Harvey did not speak for 5 full seconds. Then he said, "What if I told you the light worked?" The studio fell completely silent for the 3rd time. Lorraine looked at him. Her face moved through the same stages that Calvin's had moved through, that Earl's had moved through, the information arriving in waves, each one crossing her face before the next one came. The first wave was confusion. The second was a recalibration so rapid it was almost invisible. The third was a specific physical stillness. The stillness of a woman who has been waiting for 8 years and has just heard something that her body understood 4 seconds before her mind was ready to confirm it. She said, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, "Is he here?" Steve said, "He's been here the whole time." The studio fell completely silent for the 4th time. He turned toward the side of the stage. He nodded once. The door opened. Deshaun Mabry was 34 years old, and he was standing in that doorway in a pressed suit, and he was looking at the back of his mother's head, and his face was doing something that the cameras caught from 2 angles simultaneously, and that Serena, at the left position, said afterward was the most complete thing she had ever seen a human face do. Not one emotion, but all of them, layered and simultaneous. The face of a man who has been walking toward a door for 8 years and has just found it open exactly as he was told it would be. Lorraine turned around. She saw him. Her hands came up, both of them, up and open, the instinctive gesture of a woman whose body remembered, before anything else, what it was made to do when this specific person was in the room. Deshaun said, "Mom, it's me." He said it the way you say something that you have been rehearsing for 8 years, and that, now that you are saying it, you understand no rehearsal could have prepared you for. Simply, completely, with everything that 8 years contained, compressed into 3 words that were also the only 3 words that had ever been necessary. Lorraine crossed the stage. She did not walk. She moved in the way that the body moves when it has stopped consulting the mind entirely. When something older than decision is in charge. When the 8 years collapse to 0 and there is only this. Her arms around him, both of them. Her face against his shoulder. Her hands on his back spread wide in the way that hands spread when they are confirming the full presence of something they were afraid was gone. Deshaun held her. He held her with the specific intensity of a man who understands, in his bones, what he put in the distance between this moment and the last one, and who is not performing the understanding, but simply living inside it, in the way that recovery asks you to live inside things, rather than away from them. He said, into the side of her head, in a voice that the cameras barely caught, You never stopped being my mom." The studio fell completely silent for the 5th time. It was not silence. It was the sound of 236 people discovering simultaneously that they had been holding their breath and letting it go. And the letting go had a sound, low, collective, human. The sound of a room that has been given a gift it did not pay for and cannot believe it received. Serena had stepped back from her camera. The floor director Anthony had taken off his headset. A production assistant near the exit doors had turned away from the monitor. Dr. Patterson, standing in the corridor outside the set, had his hand flat against the wall and was looking at the floor with the expression of a man who does this work because of moments like this one, and who still, after years of this work, finds himself inside them as fully as anyone in the room. Dorothy had both hands over her face. Carl had his arm around her. Wanda Prejane, who had known for 30 years more than she had been told, who had been 3 houses down through all of it, was crying with the openness of someone who has been holding something on behalf of a friend for a long time and has just been released from the holding. Marcus, who had made the call in January, who had held the space between his brother and his mother for 8 years, who had talked to Deshawn 6 times and to Gerald once, and to Angela through 6 weeks of coordination, was sitting on the bench with his face in his hands and was making no effort to remove it. Steve Harvey stood 8 feet away with both hands pressed against his chest and his eyes wet and his jaw tight in the way it gets tight when he is holding something in because the moment belongs to someone else and he knows it. Then he turned to the audience, and he could not speak immediately, and he did not try to pretend that he could. He stood there for 3 seconds with the audience watching him not speak, and the audience was completely still, and then he found it. He said, "I want to talk to everyone watching at home." His voice was not steady, and he did not make it so. There is a Deshawn somewhere watching this right now, someone who has been away from a door for 2 years or 5 years or 8 years and who has told themselves the door is closed because that is easier than finding out it might still be open. He stopped. The light is on. I don't know how else to say it. The light is on, and it has been on the whole time, and the only thing between you and that door is the walk to it. He paused. Start walking tonight. The audience stood up. The Gaines family had not moved since the door opened. Their captain, a 58-year-old woman named Helen Gaines, had a brother she had not spoken to in 4 years. She did not announce this. She crossed the stage and stood in front of Lorraine and Deshawn without interrupting what was between them, and said simply, when Lorraine looked up, he came back. Lorraine looked at her. Her eyes were wet. She said, "He came back." Helen said, "They do. Sometimes they come back." She took Lorraine's hand for a moment. Then she stepped back and let her family step back with her, and nobody on either side of that stage was thinking about the game, and nobody in the room minded at all. But Steve wasn't done. He paused taping for 31 minutes. He sat with Lorraine and Deshawn and Dr. Patterson on the edge of the stage, and for 31 minutes the 3 of them talked. Deshawn telling his mother the 14 months, the print shop, the apartment, the sponsor Gerald. The things Dr. Patterson had helped him understand about himself across 9 months of work that had been, in his own description, the hardest and most necessary thing he had ever done. Lorraine listened to all of it without interrupting, the way she listened to things that mattered, completely, with her full, organized attention, with the face that had learned how to receive hard information and hold it without flinching. When Deshawn finished, she took both his hands. She looked at him for a long moment. She said, "I need you to know something. I never prayed for you to come back on my timeline. I prayed for you to come back when you were ready. because I wanted you to come back to me whole." She paused. "You look whole." Deshaun looked at his mother for a long time. Then he said, "I'm working on it." She said, "That's all I ever asked." He said, "I know." They sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "Gerald sounds like good people." He said, "He is." She said, "I'd like to meet him sometime." He said, "He'd like that too." Before taping resumed, the show had confirmed continued therapeutic support for both Lorraine and Deshaun individually, and for them jointly, the family component of Deshaun's ongoing program, which Dr. Patterson had been recommending for 3 months, and which the timing of the reunion had now made both possible and necessary. The first joint session was scheduled for the following Tuesday. The episode broadcast 8 weeks later. The clip, Steve's question, the 5 seconds of silence before he spoke again, the door, the 3 words, was viewed 18.9 million times in the first 24 hours. By the end of the first month, it had reached 49.1 million. It was covered in 31 countries. Every major addiction recovery organization in the United States referenced the episode in their communications within 2 weeks of broadcast. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration reported a 28% increase in family helpline contacts in the 30 days following the episode. The hashtag, #TheLightIsOn, trended for 8 consecutive days in 19 countries and was used, in the months following, by more than 67,000 people. Family members of people in recovery themselves, people who had been away from a door for any reason and were deciding whether to walk back toward it. 3 months after that Thursday in Atlanta, Deshaun had dinner at his mother's house in Shreveport for the first time in 8 years. He drove from Atlanta. He arrived on a Saturday afternoon, and he stood at the front door for a moment before knocking, which he did because the door was hers, and he understood that arriving correctly meant arriving as a guest until the arriving itself had reestablished what the 8 years had interrupted. Lorraine opened the door. She looked at him standing there. She said, "You don't knock at this door." She took his arm and brought him inside. Gerald had come. Lorraine had insisted. Once Deshaun told her he existed. She had called Deshaun the week before and said she would like to make dinner for his sponsor, and that this was not optional. Gerald had driven from Atlanta with Deshaun and had sat at the kitchen table and eaten Lorraine's cooking and said, at the end of the meal, that he understood now why Deshaun had talked about her the way he had. Lorraine had looked at him and said, "How did he talk about me?" Gerald had said, "Like the light was always on." Lorraine had been quiet for a moment. Then she had said, "Good, that's right." A year after the taping, Deshaun was at 26 months of sobriety. He had moved from the print shop to a better job, a facilities management position at a community center in Atlanta that worked with young people in addiction recovery. A job that required him to be present for people who were in the place he had been, and that he did with the specific quality of attention of someone who knew the landscape from the inside. Marcus had told Lorraine about the job over the phone, and she had been quiet for a moment, and then she had said, "He's going to be good at that." Marcus had said, "He already is." Today, the Light Is On Foundation, named for the 5 words that had organized the nation's response, funded by viewer donations in the 60 days following broadcast, totaling $1.8 million, provides family reconciliation support and recovery navigation services to families separated by addiction in 34 states. It has a specific program for parents of people in recovery, the people who keep the light on, through which a family navigator provides monthly support, practical guidance on the reconciliation process, and connection to therapeutic resources. The program has served 4,318 families. Its intake form asks one question before any other. How long has the light been on? The answers range from 3 months to 31 years. Every one of them is served the same way, with the understanding that the waiting is not nothing, that the keeping of the light is its own form of courage, and that the door being open is the whole of what is required for the rest to become possible. The folder on Lorraine's phone is still labeled D. She has not renamed it. She has not needed to, because D is still the right label. It was always the right label. It was a label for a person, not a situation. And the person is still the same person. Still her son. Still the one who had her laugh and his father's restlessness, and who is now, at 26 months, learning how to be in a room without needing to leave it. She added a text to the folder the Sunday after the reunion dinner, not from him. One she had written herself and saved without sending, the way she sometimes did when there was something she needed to say and was not sure of the right moment for saying it. She had written it after Gerald left, and Deshawn had helped her with the dishes, and then sat at the kitchen table while she made coffee, the way he used to sit at that table when he was 17, and the trouble had not yet started. And the landscape was still the ordinary landscape of a mother and a son who had time. What she had written was 4 words. She had not sent them because she did not need to send them. She had written them because they were true, and because truth, she had learned across 8 years of open-ended prayer, did not always require a recipient. Sometimes you wrote it down for yourself. Sometimes the writing was the whole thing. She had written, "I knew you'd come." Some doors stay open, not because the person holding them open does not feel the weight of the holding, but because they have decided that the weight is worth it, that the person on the other side is worth it, that love is not a thing you close when it gets heavy, but a thing you hold open precisely because it has gotten heavy, and the holding is the proof of the love. Lorraine Mabry had held a door open for 8 years in the specific way of a woman who prays without deadline and leaves lights on without announcement, and keeps a folder on her phone labeled with a single letter, and does not, under any circumstances, give up on a word she finds too permanent for what she is actually doing, which is waiting, faithfully, patiently, in the open-ended way, for an arrival that she has always believed was coming, on a timeline that was never hers to set. It came on a Thursday in May. The door was open. The light was on. He walked through it. If this story found you today, leave a comment and tell us about someone you are still holding the light on for. Share this with a family who needs to know the door can still open. Subscribe, because every week we find the moments that prove that love, held long enough, is always eventually answered.